terrible has happened. There was indeed reason to be nervous, and there were moments in which I did feel nervous, knowing the history of what has happened to people who've taken controversial stands or discovered disquieting findings in the behavioral sciences. There are many cases, some of which I talk about in the book, of people who've been slandered, called Nazis, physically assaulted, threatened with criminal prosecution for stumbling across or arguing about controversial findings. And you never know when you're going to come across one of these booby traps. My favorite example is a pair of psychologists who did research on left-handers and published some data showing that left-handers are, on average, more susceptible to disease, more prone to accidents, and have a shorter lifespan. It's not clear, by the way, since then whether that is an accurate generalization, but the data at the time seemed to support that. Well, pretty soon they were barraged with enraged letters, death threats, ban on the topic in a number of scientific journals coming from irate left-handers and their advocates. And they were literally afraid to open their mail because of the venom and vituperation that they had inadvertently inspired. Well, I mean, the night is young, but so the book has been out for half a year, and nothing terrible has happened. None of the dire professional consequences has taken place. I haven't been exiled from the city of Cambridge. But what I wanted to talk about are two of these hot buttons that have aroused the strongest response in the 80-odd reviews that the Blank Slate has received. I'll just put that list up for a few seconds and see if you can guess which two topics. I would estimate that probably two of these topics inspired probably 90% of the reaction in the various reviews and radio interviews. It's not violence and war, it's not race, it's not gender, it's not Marxism, it's not Nazism. They are the arts and parenting. So let me tell you what aroused such irate responses, and I'll let you decide whether the claims are really that outrageous. Well, let me start with the arts. I note that among the long list of human universals that I presented a few slides ago are art. There is no society ever discovered in the remotest corner of the world that has not had something that we would consider the arts. Visual arts, decoration of surfaces and bodies appears to be a human universal. Telling of stories, music, dance, poetry found in all cultures, and many of the motifs and themes that give us pleasure in the arts can be found in all human societies. A preference for symmetrical forms, the use of repetition and variation, even things as specific as the fact that in poetry all over the world you have lines that are very close to 3 seconds long, separated by pauses. Now, on the other hand, in the second half of the 20th century, the arts are frequently said to be in decline. And I have a collection, probably 10 or 15 headlines from highbrow magazines deploring the fact that the arts are in decline in our time. I'll give you a couple of representative quotes. "We can assert with some confidence that our own period is one of decline, that the standards of culture are lower than they were 50 years ago, and that the evidences of this decline are visible in every department of human activity." That's a quote from T.S. Eliot, a little more than 50 years ago. And a more recent one, "The possibility of sustaining high culture in our time is becoming increasingly problematical. Serious bookstores are losing their franchise. Non-profit theaters are surviving primarily by commercializing their repertory. Symphony orchestras are diluting their programs. Public television is increasing its dependence on reruns of British sitcoms. Classical radio stations are dwindling. Museums are resorting to blockbuster shows. Dance is dying." That's from Robert Brustein, the famous drama critic and director in The New Republic about 5 years ago. Well, in fact, the arts are not in decline. I don't think this would come as a surprise to anyone in this room, but by any standard, they have never been flourishing to a greater extent. There are, of course, entirely new art forms and new media, many of which you've heard over these few days. By any economic standard, the demand for art of all forms is skyrocketing, as you can tell from the price of opera tickets, by the number of books sold, by the number of books published, the number of musical titles released, the number of new albums, and so on. The only grain of truth to this complaint that the arts are in decline come from three spheres. One of them is in elite art since the 1930s, say the kinds of works performed by major symphony orchestras, where most of the repertory is before 1930, or the works shown in major galleries and prestigious museums. In literary criticism and analysis, probably 40 or 50 years ago, literary critics were a kind of cultural hero. Now they're kind of a national joke. And in the humanities and arts programs in the universities, which by many measures indeed are in decline. Students are staying away in droves. Universities are disinvesting in the arts and humanities. Well, here's a diagnosis. They didn't ask me, but by their own admission, they need all the help that they can get. And I would like to suggest that it's not a coincidence that this supposed decline in the elite arts and criticism occurred in the same point in history in which there was a widespread denial of human nature. A famous quotation can be found, if you look on the web, you can find it in literally scores of English course syllabuses. In or about December 1910, human nature changed. A paraphrase of a quote by Virginia Woolf, and there's some debate as to what she actually meant by that, but it's very clear looking at these syllabuses that it's used now as a way of saying that all of the forms of appreciation of art that were in place for centuries or millennia in the 20th century were discarded. That beauty and pleasure in art, probably a human universal, began to be considered saccharine or kitsch or commercial. Barnett Newman had a famous quote that the impulse of modern art is the desire to destroy beauty, which was considered bourgeois or tacky. Here's just one example. I mean, this is perhaps a representative example of visual depiction of the female form in the 15th century. Here is a representative example of the depiction of the female form in the 20th century. And as you can see, something has changed in the way the elite arts